Hi, all. So today is Tuesday, August 22nd. It's 6:18 p.m. Eastern Time. We're just getting ready for the Atlanta Hololens Meetup featuring the Microsoft VR Gambit VR viewer. So that ought to be exciting to kind of hear a little bit more about why Microsoft is getting involved in VR, given that they've come out with their HoloLens. So thanks for standing by. We're just getting set up.
Thanks for bringing it over too. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're the one who's hosting it?
James is, so he's holding the device there.
As far as the spec, yeah, I would imagine it would have to be, especially because they've been released months. But resolution was good. I probably repeat that both, like, great as far as visuals, but, and the question is like, really would be, especially.
Hi all, I'm Dan Smigrod, founder of the We Get Around Network Forum. You're watching WGAN-TV live, almost live. We'll get started in about 5 minutes. Coming up shortly is the Atlanta HoloLens Meetup. And We actually have something that, some special planned in terms of seeing the new Microsoft VR viewer. So there's going to be a representative from Microsoft and a representative from an agency that's here in Atlanta that's been playing with the device. So Annie Eaton from Future Us is going to show us from an agency's perspective why this VR viewer is interesting. Anyway, if you can stand by, thanks for your patience. We just wanted to plug in everything, make sure everything was working, do a sound check, check the video, just know that we were up and running. Cool. So thanks again for joining us for live at 5, WGAN TV in the We Get Around Network Forum. And there is a discussion going on in the forum right now, so if there's anything that you want to add or some questions you want to ask, today we'll probably skip doing the virtual studio audience, just be a one-way stream. But if you want to join and text me a question that you want me to propose to Ian or Annie, the two speakers, just join virtual studio audience, or feel free to leave your questions in the We Get Around Network Forum discussion about today's topic. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, thanks for bearing with us while we wait for the program to begin.
Yeah, and also, I wish I could find what Peter said. Peter asked her about just terminology with kind of everyone can use five things. Yeah, what did they say?
Times are shifting, but now mixed reality is an umbrella term for the opaque devices and also the Hololens devices.
Okay. I like that. Okay. See, I didn't hear that. Yeah, she said, don't call this VR college aggressive. Under the mixed reality. And I believe you. Oh, this is very similar to what I wanted. No, like I literally wanted this slide, and I was gonna ask you if you had it, and now it's right here in front of me. Oh, really? On this slide?
There's a that image reality or HoloLens and mixed reality devices. There's a set of approved
Really good.
presentations. That's all we can do.
That's it.
Kind of direct away from the big ones. Hey, how you got? There's hope before your time in this role. Sure. That's the biggest part of my life. Alright, so it's like same with same with the Hololens. So how we're gonna demo it without the machine?
So
I was just watching movies on the laptop. It was pretty good. I only had to
Yeah,
click
this is, you guys like watch the college first with this like.
They got,
full
yeah,
course.
it was.
Full course around.
They had changed the gate to another place that was next to my gate, and it was also going to Atlanta, so I went to the new gate, and then by the time I realized the call back was going to the 3-minute gate, but I was getting tired.
that happened.
And people have problems running them on service book. It's USB drive version now. Okay. Does it start like, I mean,
So, kind of like,
how would you say?
It's very exciting. We have that data for our last office, and from another location we were working with, and then
So.
they just work out with them, and then we're like, oh, then we can get in. He's like really happy. So whatever we make you guys, feel free. And we have a couple of other reasons that we could potentially use the data. So if any of those came out, we'll hopefully bring you back in and pay you. Hopefully. I mean, of course we would pay you if we bring you back in, but like, we need to figure out, I just figured, yeah, when we have something that's
real tangible,
Yeah.
your space, and so.
Yeah.
eventually somebody else's space, you can
right.
your own environment and show.
And that's really helpful, so we'll see, we're working on something with Target right now. There's a way to implement some of this with them and show them what you can use it for us, then absolutely we will. But just any of these big companies, you know, it's just a little cost.
I think that's probably a understatement of the century to say that. Yeah, but I've worked in multi-billion dollar companies, it's why I had the company. 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Selling things that weren't just to get it okay, because actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I know, and I only lived in like a portion of it at a much smaller company, like the biggest company, where it goes around 500 million, and even at that, like, there's just so many people doing nothing, getting paid to do nothing, I'm like, oh, people. So, definitely get you there.
You know, like a million years ago, I had the innovation group. And then for that, I cost 36 months to get the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think it was 33 pages with 3 years.
Yeah.
No minimum $900. Nothing that the insurance requires.
Right.
So basically, what you
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember like,
There's an outlet or bigger office down there.
right there. And when we first started working with another one of the companies, or umbrella, like we didn't have the insurance requirements big enough, and luckily the project was good enough that we were able to up it. But it's like so annoying when you have that, and you need to make that commitment without even any commitment of them. So, yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. You're like, you realize what I'm doing? I don't need that much. Yeah.
General counsel for their side.
That's convenient.
There's no way that she was, she was making $10,000 a week.
Yeah.
Her own. This was a great. Dollar commitment.
Right. Yeah.
You have to sign
Okay.
and then we'll figure out, what project, what we're gonna pay you.
Like,
It's not gonna work.
yeah.
So I literally, that was
Oh, I definitely know. Yeah, it does get them, and I say with for specific, it took about 6 months, and then it was another maybe 5 months before we actually had the contract signed for the actual work. And then that was just like phase 1, which was very small. And so then 4 months after that, we finally had like the big project. So it was definitely a year and a half process.
Technology changed from the time you
It did.
expressed interest in this is no longer the right.
Right. That was all tricky, but yeah, I definitely understand your pain there. But yeah, I'll let you know anything that comes up because like we definitely have ways we see the data like that to be used, but like it's selling one of these things hard. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're definitely embedded on the website. excited. I sent it over to her today. I'm like, what can we get to do? She was like, this is amazing. So it was all worth it, but we really
Yeah,
you have a
presentation.
presentation. I wasn't going to be able to give a presentation. I wasn't expecting
Wow.
Spread my
So I should say thanks for your patience. We're just still a little bit of setup going on here at the Atlanta HoloLens Meetup. But it's going to be an exciting presentation to hear about the Microsoft new VR viewer just came out. Two speakers, one from Microsoft and one from a virtual reality agency here in Atlanta. So, you know, just hang out, sit back, and hope you enjoy tonight's meetup. It is pretty geeky. It's a little, you know, specialized kind of thing. That, you know, if you're thinking about VR, or maybe you haven't even thought about it, I think it's just interesting to see all the things that's happening in this space. So hopefully we'll get started soon. I think about 25 people just rolled in. And again, if you're just tuning in, this is WGAN-TV live at 5, and we're waiting for the program to begin. Thank you.
So we have contact with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can take just 5 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. Tell me when you're ready.
Yeah.
Sit down.
If this all turned around in a week and a half.
They're fast.
They're I'm like,
Hey, no, it's good.
like we had coffee and it lasted way longer than I was supposed to. Just kind of like mentoring.
I want to say, is it
But
Norbert?
I was like, I want to like.
I'm trying to remember your name. Norbert?
Because I need to
Ivan?
learn,
Ivan.
you know, so
Not
that's
even
really
close.
cool.
Ivan, good to see you. Good to
But
see you.
no, we're actually. But the first thing that we're doing is actually.
Hi, everybody. My name is James Apshe. Welcome to the HoloLens Meetup in Atlanta, our August edition. This month, we're going to take a slight change. We've been talking about augmented reality, basically HoloLens technology, for a long time. But recently, Microsoft's come out with their new mixed reality devices, which are more similar to devices like the Oculus and the HTC Vive. So it's kind of really exciting. It marks a slight departure from Microsoft and gives us a glimpse of a grander strategy that they're unveiling a little bit at a time. And for our speakers, we're very fortunate to have Ian Philpott and Ethan, who, if you don't know, they were on TV talking about this technology just a few weeks ago. And we're very lucky to have these stars here today to tell us all about mixed reality.
So are we good right here?
Yeah.
I'll push your button.
Yes, you do. So we're talking mixed reality. I'm Ian. That's Annie, obviously. So let's go to the next one. So really, just kind of set the stone, because this is always one of those things where Microsoft comes up with their own terminology, right? And people are like, well, what does this actually mean? So we'll kind of set the stage with some of the technology and terminology, and then we'll move on from there. So you really kind of have two realities at this point, right? You have the physical world, which we're all very attuned to, hopefully, and then you also have the digital world, which some of us are getting more and more attuned to daily, right? As we kind of build things, code and things of that nature, that's kind of things living in the digital world, whereas as we build things like buildings and stuff like that, that's kind of living in the physical world. And where we're going with mixed reality, if you want to go on to the next one, you know, a nice little Venn diagram here where they kind of mix, right? No pun intended. And that's kind of the idea with Windows 10 and the new mixed reality devices. You've seen the ones from Acer and you've seen the one from HP. It's taking things in the digital world like your applications and things that we all know and love on Windows 10 and bringing them into kind of that mixed reality, virtual reality world by bringing physical aspects to it. So let's go on into the next one. Now this one is going to take multiple clicks. See if we can time it. So you have the physical, on this side, you have the digital on that side. Now you bring something digital into the physical world, right? That's kind of the first part. You bring something, bring something physical into the digital world, or you bring something digital into the physical world. All of that kind of lives between there. That's where we kind of define what mixed reality is. Now, what are our devices that we have that today? AR kind of lives over here in the physical reality, going that way. Then you have VR living in the digital reality, coming in this way. And we have a couple of different devices that will kind of live in both of those worlds. If you click it there, we have the mixed reality holographic headset. As we know, the Hololens. We're at the Hololens Meetup, right? So that kind of comes in and tries to marry the digital world in with your physical world by looking through the glass. Whereas in the digital reality, VR, you're in that full immersion, right? And we want you to start trying to bring physical objects into that. And seeing a lot of different kind of tech around that. I think I've probably talked about like some of the 360 stuff, the cameras and things like that you do. You can bring that in right there. All right, so yeah, you can just jump over this. Is a blue screen PowerPoint. Microsoft kind of stands on this, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. But the idea is that by 2020, we expected to see 76 million headsets sold by 2020.
Microsoft wants
Well, hopefully it's the Microsoft. No, this is an independent study. This isn't just Microsoft. This is IDC. This is kind of showing there is a market. So people like yourselves who are creators or whatnot who actually want to build for this, there's a little bit of skepticism. What is really happening right here? What is the space? How is it growing? So there's good forecasts being shown for that. So I'd say this is a place to spend time focusing your energies. All right, and now I'll turn it over to Annie.
No, I can talk.
So, yeah, you got the head-mounted displays, and Annie has a couple of them, so I will let her talk a little bit about what she sees these days.
Sure. So with the new mixed reality headsets that are kind of more on the fully digital side, the immersive headsets, we have both the HP, and maybe Ian can bring them over and ban away from me a little bit. Yeah, HP has a shorter cord. So we've got the Acer, which is blue, if you guys haven't seen it yet, and the HP, he gets the whole prettier one. Like most of my clothes are black, so. So this one's HP, this is Acer. They really are very similar for those of you who have used one or both of them. But the cool thing is both of them have this little hinge that flips up. So because these are development editions, we're finding this very convenient because you don't have to just take it completely off when you're in the development process and need to kind of go back to your computer. They also have these depth sensors. Oh, did you break it?
No.
We also have these depth sensors, kind of a I don't know, more rudimentary version of the ones that the HoloLens has, but they still do scan the environment and allow you more inside-out positional tracking. So whereas in other virtual reality devices like the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive, you have something on the outside really capturing your motion in Z space, whether it's infrared one way or cameras the other way. This one does it all self-contained, and it actually was pleasantly surprising how well it works.
So how is
it doing that? Well, the cameras in the front, like these two right here, they are actually doing depth mapping in the room. So similar to the HoloLens.
So the actual map is wrong.
Yeah, they are mapping the room.
It's not just like motion tracking. It's like I mean, I can do this like a HoloLens.
There we go, pass it around.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it is actually mapping. You do kind of set it up similar to the HTC Vive, in that you have to like actually walk around with it and trace your environment, and then it has like a play space. But because it's all being tracked from the inside out, you don't actually have to stay in the play space. It's only for your personal safety. So that's kind of another cool thing. And while these are tethered, we've actually been using them with the MSI VR1 backpack. So we've been able to actually walk around fully in our office with them, which has been really nice. Have to have something driving it. So you can't, it's not like the HoloLens where it's self-contained, but it can be more compact than like an Oculus or tethered to a tower. The play space, well, we have been cheating. So we've been using a much bigger play space than it has given us, and I'm actually not sure on the exact dimensions. Do you happen to know?
No, I don't.
Okay. I think that when we were mapping, it really wanted us to stay within like kind of like an 8-foot circle. I don't know. Have you seen similar? No.
Oh, big play spaces.
Yeah.
So when I do it, I just sit and don't move.
Okay, that's cool. Well, we walked around probably at least like 12 by 12, and we were fine.
Yeah.
Because it's, I mean, again, there's nothing really on the outside tracking it. It's all self-contained. But it probably has some recommendations that we are not doing because we like pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
So will it automatically sense, so if my play space is, say, that 20 by 20 square, if I go out of that, will it pop up a chaperone
It will
that
pop up a
says,
chaperone grid.
well, outside of the 2020, will it
No.
dynamically create a chaperone?
No, it's like whatever is the play space that you set up is the chaperone grid. Once you leave that, you're on your own.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why you flip.
That's why you can flip it up. Yeah. After I left, I was kind of like doing this because I was a little apprehensive, but it will let you walk outside, as will other headsets. But you just got to be careful.
If you're not using a laptop, I guess you're limited by the length of the
You are, yes, you are. And this one, I guess, is probably about 20 feet. All of it.
All right.
Any thoughts, talking about the cord, in keeping it from tangling up and twisting up on itself?
The cord?
Yeah.
So from what we've been seeing in other similar experiences with, and I kind of just have to compare it to the Vive and the Rift because that's what we know. We have found that when you're programming something, if you keep the cord in mind and just make sure you're not doing any activity that constantly makes someone spin in a circle, generally you're pretty safe. People are really a lot more self-aware of the cable than you give them credit for. People generally either feel it tugging or they feel it under their feet. So we really have not had any issues in the past with other HMDs with the cable. But I would say, like, I think I saw one program where you do have to do a bunch of different activities and like walk around the room and make selections and things. And with the cable, they had actually purposely programmed it to where it was always going to be behind you. So you were always like in this kind of 270 degrees. You were never going to have to turn around and potentially have a hazardous situation. So I think as long as when you're developing for this, if you keep that in mind and don't have anyone spin recklessly in your program, it should be fine. People are pretty self-aware.
Speaking of cables, the Acer has the USB 3 and an HDMI, whereas the HP has a specialized cable.
It's special. It looks kind of like DisplayPort,
Yeah.
but it's not quite.
Right, so it does need its own
It
cable.
needs its own cable.
So you're talking about like this side.
Yes.
The other side is still the USB 3 of the HDMI.
Right.
Yeah.
I know the USB 3 on the other side.
Yeah, I just didn't bring it because it could detach.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to necessarily. Is this the main mix?
No, we're gonna go.
Okay.
Whoa.
Cool.
So, kind of compare and contrast, right? As we've been talking with the cables going, the HoloLens, of course, is untethered, so it's got all the compute inside of it, and it, of course, the battery kind of goes pretty quickly when you get it going pretty hard. But we've got the advanced sensors, transparent lenses, all that, the HPU, all these great things. Now, some of this does actually transport over to this one, if you go to the next one. With the immersive headsets, we're trying to do a little bit something easier. Of course, bringing it in at a much lower price point, calling them developer kits, right? Because they're not production ready. going forward. I mean, there's what, I thought there's 2, but now apparently there's 3 apps in the store right now for these. So it really is like early on, early days. We're still trying to figure out how to develop for these things. The developer experience still isn't great. It's fully supported by Visual Studio 2017, but Unity right now is kind of the partner that we're working with very closely. They're doing a great job. You have to get one of their beta products right now to even start writing code for these and moving this over. But just to get it working out of the box, I mean, it's pretty simple. What was your?
And we were able to actually plug it in. We did have to make some updates and install. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but I think that's more for the development side. We did have to do something special for Unity. Yeah. But just to actually like boot it up and start it, I think I was actually out of the office that day. I was very sad, but they got it working in like less than an hour. Yeah. So that was really cool. And as far as the experience for just the generic demo, like the graphics look great, the optics are really nice, and I would say it's comparable or even potentially clearer in the optics than some of the other VR headsets that are out there to date.
Yeah.
And then
do you have stats on those? For
not off the top of my head. Like I will Google it for you.
It's 1440 by 1440.
1440 per eye?
So this is what, the 1440?
Is that's for both of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, both of them are almost identical, I think.
Are the system requirements comparable to the Vive and the Rift, or are they going to be higher?
I think they're comparable, or even for the demo experience is lower because they actually ran off of my laptop and Vive doesn't run off of my laptop. So it may just have been the necessity for the demo experience, but it worked.
So that's the idea is like demo experience. If you're just using it to play, it'll run on a cheap PC for all intents and purposes. They actually they bring it out here. There is a couple that we saw. I was just out in Redmond, and they were letting us play with a couple of these PCs that are like built for these things. They're like inexpensive PCs that you hook these up to use it, not for development, but actually just to like use it, play games, restore.
So on this, I mean, again, it's like the spec was 4 gigabytes of RAM, DirectX 12, 4 cores. So that's it. I mean, this is the spec of mine. Is it for the consumer, for the playback?
That's going to be the consumer.
So and the problem with like
that's a minimum spec, right? Yeah, that's a minimum spec when you want to fire up itself.
Yep. But the issue with like big PCs is for development because Unity is heavy,
right?
Because like a whole other stuff.
And there's a whole other spec, and I actually have some links in here. I can make this available to you. There's some links in here that will take you right out there. There's actually this really nice matrix that goes down the list for both the HP and the Acer. Everything you need to know about development and whether it's ready, in a ready state, or whether it's like coming soon state, or we don't really know how we're going to do that part yet. So it has like the green checks, the yellow. It's a really nice layout. For instance, I think the Unity problem, where you have to run in beta. So for the development, it's kind of showing a caution right there because you're having to use beta software for Unity to actually develop really well.
So Ian, I'm sorry, I'm a little slow to this product. What is Microsoft's connection to? Is it just because it's running? What is
These are built for Windows 10.
Okay, so that's the connection. It's just the Windows 10 component. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
These are built for Windows 10,
okay.
Kind of in partnership with us.
Okay.
So that's the case. So is it the same SDK as the Hololens?
Yes.
Is it exactly the same or similar?
Right now, it is the same SDK.
Okay. So it's the same level, like low level, with DirectX, and
So that's the idea. Is we're trying to give the unified experience, right? Not only across this with the HoloLens, but also with Xbox. All of it. So there is just come in, add the SDK for mixed reality.
So that's what this mentioned. So Microsoft is coming up with dedicated PCs for this, right? And I think price point is like what, $100?
$500, yeah.
Yeah, so dedicated. What about the stuff with Xbox? Is it going around those, or is something decided yet, or?
Cool things are coming. That's true. But since I'm an evangelist, they don't tell me things that they don't want me to talk about, because I will talk about it. Because I think
So you don't know,
it's
basically.
really cool.
That's a new, like, I didn't know that, like.
I think some really cool Xbox stuff coming down the pipe for Christmas. So very cool stuff.
So as far as Christmas, are they going to ship before Christmas, or like how does it look?
With the new Xboxes,
No.
these are already out. Anything
No, as a consumer product.
VR.
Not as a developer kit, but as a consumer product. Are they going
I don't
to
know
ship
that.
this Christmas?
I wouldn't know that.
So, really quick, is the end goal for these to just play Windows Store apps, or will they also be able to consume like OSVR or run Steam apps? Will they be a one-stop VR headset, or will they only be for the Windows Store?
It's a good question. I think you can break out of the Windows Store using some of the DirectX stuff, but then that's requires you to go, pretty low level with programming C++ or whatnot in DirectX directly. I think the better story around the developer experience is for doing the Universal Windows apps. And I believe that's where most of the application development will happen. But as with anything, I think you can get out of that and go directly to DirectX. Now, as far as open source players creating drivers for them and stuff, that would be up to the open source community to kind of build that out. I doubt we're supporting that out.
So no direct support, primarily just for Windows Store.
Since you mentioned the Universal app, so I could run like ads on this side. Yeah. Basically, I would be able to view it, and it would be like flat, like in Hololens, kind of deal, right?
That's the idea.
Unless you're doing WebGL, will run it.
Yeah, if I want to like, look at is there like a launcher, like on the HoloLens, where you could like basically select bunch of the apps and
It's so new that we haven't quite seen that yet.
no, so basically you run it from the PC and you use it just as a controller, correct?
Right now, yeah. So, but you do want eventually to have the launcher with the apps like that you can launch the Edge browser, so that you can fire up WebGAN, right?
Yeah.
So that would be amazing.
But you could look at the whatever, like open Windows, like in Windows, I could just look at those things on that. No, a dedicated app. Like,
You want to see from this side? You don't have to be blinded.
I'm like dying over there.
Is this the direction though where it's going? Or just
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it's going to be more than just a viewer. So if you think about, folks like yourselves and Annie, people who are building the new ways to interact with a computer, the user interface is changing drastically and going away. And I see that happening quite a bit, and I think Microsoft sees that happen quite a bit. With the proliferation of AI and data right now, we're seeing things like digital assistants making decisions for ourselves, right? And I show up in Seattle, and I get a text message saying, hey, I bought you tickets because your band's in town, and I see that you have Wednesday night open on your calendar, right? It's like, oh, I had enough money to buy those tickets, that right there took no UI to drive, right? I think that's a beautiful story. And as you start kind of going through that, you start looking at these types of headsets, and you might have a kind of fully immersed environment when you sit down at a computer, but then when you're kind of walking around, you might have something that's not so immersed, like the HoloLens, and you have a digital assistant driving because there's nowhere to really type, there's no keypads to really interact with in that type of environment. But with the full immersive, you're not really wanting to walk around, right? So there's going to be different plays for different things. At the center of it, some sort of artificial intelligence driving all of that, I think. depending on where you're at, it'll have a level of interaction with you or not. So that's kind of my thinking from where and why Microsoft's really getting into this. Not just because, of course, Xbox, I don't know anything. Of course, they won't tell me anything, but I mean, it seems logical that eventually you'll hook one of these up to your Xbox and play games. But it also seems logical that you're going to take that a lot further and do some of the experiences I think that these folks are trying to build.
There's no place for those dedicated PCs. If Xbox would be $500, then you have a PC for $500. Why would I get a PC? But I'd rather get dedicated one now.
Yeah.
So, and also a couple things are missing from this thing. So first thing, headphones.
You still have to use external headphones.
So they give you like these external ones, or like just build up the flavor one.
I mean, my hope would be that the consumer release would have them built in, kind of like how 5 had an attachment, a headset attachment. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal. I know for those of us especially who are doing these experiences out in the field, like at events and trade shows and things like that, headphones can be really annoying. So that is my hope. You can relay it to the powers that be, but I definitely see that as an issue as well.
Yeah, also the microphone is missing, so there's no what versus the Hololens, right?
You would use basically earbuds with
The microphone?
Yeah.
Could I still drive like the same thing?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
You can still talk to it.
So that's dumb, you understand, because consumers should have a dedicated mic that would have headphones.
And what was the form factor of those $500 PCs? Does it have any different kind of form factor, like smaller, like new ways to kind of carry it around, or no? It's just straight up, okay.
Okay? Well,
Small PCs.
That's a good idea.
So, yep. So yeah, well, I think we've talked a lot about these types of issues. So just some thinking here. We're like right now we're talking about right behind us is a Broad Street, and we're talking to the city about doing some interesting things on Broad Street. And one of the things that they asked me to do was they had some 3D art created on Broad Street on what they envisioned. And then they said, can you overlay on top of this art what you're envisioning in that, right? And I thought, oh, this sounds like a perfect application for something like this. So we took it back to some of the creation and design folks at Microsoft and said, hey, can you put people walking around with HoloLens on the street? So some interesting things around that. And I think there's a big play about that. Another one that I see a lot of interest, especially here in Atlanta, is around training and development as well. Annie, I mean, this is your space, I think. What do you see?
Yeah, so my company has more experience in enterprise-facing applications. Training is definitely a big one. I was at a conference last week where one of the people on the panel with me was talking about how they were working for a company that was doing a training experience for a company that loses multiple people, like they die during training every year. It's terrible. It's true though. I can't remember the industry, but it cost them millions and millions of dollars, and of course, like lives are way more important than money. So this is great in that reason. But for the company to come on board, it made sense for them to actually save money and all these liability issues and lawsuits to do training in a more immersive experience. So it's a lot easier to get big companies to kind of latch on to ideas like this if there's some sort of cost savings or just some sort of trade-off for them. But from a more, I guess, ethical standpoint, I see it as being more important for the actual people involved in the training. So there are different ways to look at it, and you kind of just have to know your audience when you're trying to pitch these ideas. But it's really great to see larger companies already starting to take these experiences and put them into use. I know that earlier this year, GE's been kind of in the news for doing a lot in the space with training, and hopefully it continues down that path.
Yeah, I know we've been talking to many of the companies here in Atlanta have innovation centers now scattered around, and we've been going into talking to different innovation teams, and all of this stuff keeps coming up. And it's surprising people, it surprises me all the time how creative people get in the enterprise. They're like, hey, we want HoloLens to do X. And I'm sure I'm not supposed to say half the stuff that they've talked about, but these are very good categories. I think the one that I've probably not spent much time talking with people in is actually the entertainment and engagement piece. Surprisingly enough, I think the game guys and gals are kind of off. They've got a handle on it. They're already doing their thing, whereas the enterprise is really trying to understand how to use this. So very cool. All right, you want to? So, you know, what makes Microsoft different? Of course, we have the freedom of movement with the HoloLens. Not so much with these types of devices there. Kind of coming back to your point, it is one SDK, right? So we are trying to make this a unified development experience. Once Unity catches up and they release, I think it's Unity 8 that they come out of beta, then we'll be a full stack ready to go for development. And I'm sure you'll see Unreal Engine and some of the other ones come out later on as well. Like Annie said, she can attest to, you know, the setup was pretty easy as far as like when we have people come in and set up the HTC Vive and things in here with the lighthouses and things like that all around. It's people who know what they're doing very efficiently. It still takes 20 to 30 minutes just to get that going, whereas this, you just plug it in and kind of get going. So,
so
I think that's great.
Is there any kind of light or environment controls that are better used in this, with this, like?
We haven't had issues yet. In our office, it has just a giant wall of windows, so none that I have experienced. Has anyone else seen issues? No. Because
it's a depth sensor camera, it's really not a light, it should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit more trimmed out. Plus with the HoloLens, they figured out a lot of the problems with the connect and light. And I think you've seen a lot of that.
Can I use it in the dark?
Ooh, I don't know about that one. We're gonna have to test it.
That's, I mean, that's
Yeah.
That's important.
It's more of a how long signals take to get back to it.
yeah, but then it's also dark. Talking about like the arcade, like with the wire. I mean, this type of the wire. Like really taking.
I don't think you could stand here and use it because of the light.
Right.
So the light is the issue or the dark is the issue?
I think it'd be fun. It'd be kind of an interesting,
Yeah, we'll
good
test
test.
Yeah.
Turn out all the lights, go in the closet, and see if it works.
Report
Yeah.
back next month, the next
Good
meeting.
test. All right. All right, so I'm not going to dive through this. You all know the Windows 10 story. Lots of different devices. We can skip past that. I've been hitting this pretty hard already with that. Now, there is kind of, go ahead on to the next one. I think this one is an interesting one here. As you kind of look through what each device has, where you have gaze, and that comes from the tracking, right? So as you're looking around, it's tracking the fact that you're looking around in the VR environment. So gaze is still a form of input between the two devices. Gesture, you don't really have so much gestures, right? Because it's not doing any tracking of your hands and things out in front of you. So you do need some sort of controller to actually interact with the environment around you. And of course, voice was, we talked about, as long as you have the external mic, headphones, that sort of thing. Then, and I would imagine in a consumer device, you would see that.
So as far as like the gestures, like those controllers, are they supported now? I mean, do they exist or?
So right now, I think the main controller that's supported is the Bluetooth Xbox controller.
Okay, so those handle things.
None of that. I don't think.
I have heard that,
No wands? No wands?
not yet. I think it's Acer that's coming out with them, but HP hasn't announced yet. Yeah. One has announced and one hasn't, but we don't have a date for that yet.
So with the gaze tracking, is that just your head direction separate from your body direction, or is it actually tracking your eyes?
It's just
Or any
head,
FOV
head
rendering?
direction.
So no FOV rendering or anything?
Not yet.
Plans for the consumer model that you know of?
Like that's a hidden question.
No. So a couple of interesting points around, and I'm guessing you guys are gonna be going through some of this.
Oh, we're in the middle of this right now.
Right. Important. And I imagine going through this process will be a little bit frustrating. As you kind of look through the checklist here, port your code to a universal Windows platform. Well, that is a lot of C# type of development there. I mean, you can do C++, right? But that will be a problem. Or something that you have to think about. Okay, I wrote over here, now I need to actually bring it into a UWP type of application. Not the easiest thing to do, not something you're going to fire up a Project Centennial and just port it over using that. Now, the next one, of course, is validating middleware tooling. And I think that's an interesting point, too, where you've got to go to the vendor for any of like the game board app modules and things that you might bring into your application. You got to make sure that they run under the Universal Windows platform as well, which could be you could be at the mercy of the vendor, right? Hey, when are you going to bring this over? And you got to hope that your people like you are hammering them with the same questions to get them. Oh, well, we do have the demand for this. Let's actually bring this over to UWP. And then, of course, pull out the VR stuff that you've done and put it in the mixed reality APIs using the SDK. So simple, right? Just push a button, and all of a sudden you've got an app running. So how far are you guys along with this?
We have a couple of other projects we're working on, so we haven't been able to dedicate as much time. And I think we got those devices 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Not done yet?
Not done yet. But the program we're porting over is a experience that we created originally to educate people about VR and AR and MR technology while being in a headset. So as soon as we do have it done, we would love to bring it back and show you guys.
Unity project?
In it.
Cool. And there again, push it out to the Windows Store, which is a great experience, as I've pushed a couple of Microsoft first-party apps out to the store. It's you would think it's like, hey, we're pushing this to strip DRM off of Windows Media stuff. I built an app for the media team and sent it to the store and was like, hey, we need this out there like yesterday. 3 weeks later, we're still like, guys, we're Microsoft trying to publish a Microsoft app, you know. So the store, they've actually been doing a lot of work to try and increase how fast they can actually get these out to the store. So let's go on that. Yeah, we'll go on past this one. And I will publish. I'll give these to James to put out on the Meetup site. And there's a lot of good information here around that. A lot of nice short links for you. The AKAMS MR is a place to go out and get the development tools and things of that nature. We do have a community. You guys have a lot of community here in Atlanta, which is amazing. Between the HoloLens Meetup, Mixed Reality Meetup, Virtual Reality Meetups. I think we're all represented here as well. So make sure you're listed on these so that the community at large knows that what we're doing here in Atlanta. I think that would be great. All right, that's what I have.
Yeah, so I guess just a quick question to the audience is, and I'm thinking of this in a mindset of that we developed for AR, MR, and VR, but are most of you guys strict HoloLens, or have many of you kind of gone cross-platform? Cross? Okay, that's good. I was just going to quickly kind of talk about best practices for a more opaque experience, mainly because when I tried the MR devices for the first time, while they were awesome and I was pleasantly surprised with the tracking, just some of the interaction with the environment was a little different than I was expecting. For instance, it had like a little ledge for no reason, which was a beautiful architectural choice. But when walking, my body wasn't actually elevating, yet my eyesight was elevating. I got a little bit of discomfort. So while the experience was very pretty, that's just something that I would have thought of as a VR developer, that as an AR developer, MR developer, you may or may not have thought about. And while many of you are cross-platform and may not have those issues, I would say take a look at it from another. Need an increase in attention to those details. That's what PSA.
Things that mess with your inner
Things
ear.
that mess with your inner ear. And we learned that the hard way early on. So, yeah, that was my last final note.
So I have a question. So, we've actually obviously played with the Hololens and everything for that for it. My Acer is like being delivered tomorrow, the day after, but I've never played with it. What is the interaction experience? So it's not AR anymore, like the HoloLens, you know, it's coverage. If you're interacting, are you still using those same gestures? Is it a whole different thing? I mean, if you're playing a game, board game or whatever, what are you doing to interact with it using that? For instance, that is like a bunch of the AT units. What's the
Right now it's an Xbox controller.
So go buy a Bluetooth Xbox controller before you get your device that you have it ready to go. Otherwise, you'll just be looking around and nothing will be
I
happening.
thought they were going to have some special controllers soon or something like that.
Soon. We don't have a date, and it's only one of the headsets, not both. So,
Which one is going to have it?
like I have it written down over there. Is it Acer? Yeah, I thought it was Acer.
It'll be a special controller for it. We don't know when, but for now, you said you can buy an Xbox Bluetooth controller, and it'll connect up.
Yep.
Okay.
So it all plugs into your PC, right? So you just connect it up that way.
So is Microsoft going to be controlling the specs for the controllers, or what's the story? Because my Facebook beer said that's nicer product.
Kind of like we didn't control the specs for PCs or any of that. We're just giving them the Windows platform and the developer story for them to build hardware around that. And it's up to the vendor to build hardware.
So, but the controllers will be supported through the SDK. Here, sure. Will they be? So that's not going to be a spec, or
We would have to build that into the SDK.
Yeah.
Sure. And there would have to be some coordination. But yeah, I think that would happen.
I think the question that he's kind of getting at is it when they develop those controllers, are we going to see controllers that have massively different button setups or interaction setups? Are they going to be bound to like just the buttons that exist on a current Xbox controller? Will they have in A, B, X, Y?
All very interesting questions.
I wish I knew the answers to those.
I want one more on the
What would you
controllers.
prefer in that scenario? Would you prefer being able to have a multitude of buttons, depending on what controller you wanted, depending on what game you wanted, or would you rather have a standard set of Xbox controllers just in wands? I mean, what would that?
It seems like it's fairly early to standardize, but at the same time, having to go out and buy 20 different wands for 20 different headsets seems a bit ridiculous if they've all got a different button setup.
Sure.
Yeah. I would hope that they would be standardized, but I mean, it's kind of like a preference as well, because I know a lot of people prefer the ergonomic feel of the Oculus Touch controllers, but I actually don't prefer those because my background is not as a gamer. So my friends who are gamers like that because it still has the joysticks and then the A, B, X, and Y, but I prefer the Vive controllers because I can just grab things as I naturally would grab things. So yes, I hope they do standardize it, but I hope that maybe there would also be some sort of deviation for preference.
So with the capacitive touch on the touch controllers and the new knuckles, do you know if they're looking at that for any of these new controllers that are coming out, or is it still just unannounced information?
Still unannounced.
Yeah.
Will we see them released at the same time as the commercial version, or still, you don't know?
We don't know.
All good questions, though.
They are good
All
questions.
very good questions.
perhaps we have had this meetup a little too early. But no, it's all very new, and that's exciting that we're all at the beginning of it. But hopefully as information progresses, there's a great outlet like this meetup to talk about it.
Yep.
So did I order them right now?
Mhm.
I mean, there's no like backlog or anything?
There might be a backlog.
So I just ordered last week the Acer.
Okay.
It was shipped immediately.
Uh-huh.
I tried to order the HP and every single outlet says out of stock. So that was as of a week ago.
Okay.
Now that might change next week.
I was looking at the Microsoft store, they have the Acer in right now, but.
And we have 2 HoloLens and I got those with no
Yeah.
problem.
So where do you order them from? Like from HP?
I ordered everything from the Microsoft store. But I looked for the HP on that store and all kinds of other places, and every single one says.
What's the, all kinds of other places?
Oh, I went to HP, for example. And then
Okay.
if you search for that, like HP device, you'll see buy it, everywhere, and they all said. Yeah, it wasn't any.
Is it $349? Huh? Is it $349 for the HP one?
$349, yeah.
Oh, $349?
I believe so.
It was $299 for the Acer, but no, just paid it. But you want the HoloLens, that's $3,000.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It's just cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions, thoughts, concerns, feedback?
I need a demo next week.
Want the demo next time, okay.
Is it too soon to think about potential applications on the client side of when you would propose to use the Microsoft Gambit versus this, that, or the other?
We actually already have a proposal that is working with these. But that is just one out of many. Like for most things, we're still proposing the headsets we're used to until we kind of learn more. And the main reason is because we wanted to integrate with other Microsoft products. So it's not too early, but you do have to have a very specific use for it. And then, of course, as everything we do is enterprise, the main reason we can do it is because we're very controlled with what technology everyone's using.
Was there one specific aspect about this VR viewer that you wanted to insert it into the proposal versus something else, or
It was because
it's Microsoft?
It's Microsoft.
Okay.
Yes, and also because we hope that it will work with like in other ways with other Microsoft products. So I guess technically it is because it's Microsoft, but we wanted something that would work with a whole slew of different products, whereas with the Vive you can't do that, and with the Rift you can't do that. They just don't have the power and backing. Microsoft. It's you.
That's me.
Shout hands for Ian.